the den of iniquity. Vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment. What a pity, tomorrow never certain. What dwells behind the curtain? The face of evil lurking with the shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble that either pop or topple. Many will fall and stumble. Let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso. Cannon could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, run, come, make me get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come fi get it. I say, run, run, come, make me get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come fi get it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
Microphone check, microphone check. How is everybody doing? How is everybody doing?
Pretty good.
How about you, Dr. Thunder? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Okay. Kaizo, can we get your microphone there? We haven't heard you all evening there.
Yep.
That's all you got to say. Well, anyways, ladies and gentlemen, wait. Can you say something else, Kaizo?
Yep.
Okay, that's better. Welcome to another edition of Case Closed, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Sunday. The place to be. 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Sunday, every week, having the highest level conversations on the most relevant topics. Yes, so you've heard that. And we did months before this talk about the fact that the Supreme Court was going to strike down affirmative action. And we had a very rich conversation regarding the dignity aspect of the conversation versus the effectiveness of the tool. What is the tool trying to achieve? I even asked the question, Dr. Thunder. I said, did black men fumble the ball with regards to this? With regards to people taking advantage of this situation. And we know some of the history and the timeline involved with that. But this is a conversation that we've had before. But today we're going to be reviewing the specifics of the case and giving our opinion on a couple of things. So if you don't mind, ladies and gentlemen, while you click that like button and you share the stream and you do all that stuff, I'm going to lay down some facts here. So there were two cases, right? It's the Students for Fair Admission versus University of Carolina and Harvard. So this group sued both University of Carolina and Harvard. All right. And affirmative action was struck down 6-3. There were 6 opinions that were written. So there's no shortage of opinions. There's no shortage of written matter for you to go look at to see exactly what happened and why it happened. I'm going to give it a quick kind of timeline constitution-wise as to where this comes from, okay? First of all, right out of the Civil War, we have the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. Now, why would this be relevant? Of course, it's relevant because the people are claiming that Harvard's criteria does not provide equal protection under the law, right? So, 14th Amendment, and then after that, what do we have? We had separate but equal, 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. Now, university agreed to be a horrible type of decision that was made there, but it stood for a while. And then 1954, Brown v. Board of Education came and said, look, the right to public education must be made available equally to all without prejudice, okay? So this is the timeline here. And then in 1957, you see there was a Justice Frankfurter who named the essential freedoms of a university, and that is to decide what to teach, who can teach, how to teach it, and who can be admitted. So universities are free to do these things, if you will, right? Now, in 1978, Becky versus the UC system, right, brought in another challenge, started muddying up the waters. In 2003 is when the court started talking about, at some point, this policy has to end. They gave 25 years at that time. Yeah, about 25 years. Now it's 20 years since 2003. Okay. And in that, they said that, look, affirmative action is fine, but it cannot be used negatively against a particular group. And now in 2023, it's been struck down, and Justice Thomas, in his opinion, not Thomas, sorry, Justice, the Chief Justice. What's his name, Dr. Thunder? What's the Chief? Roberts, right? Justice Roberts, in his opinion, basically is citing the fact that indeed the policy was used negatively against somebody, right? It was used negatively against these Asian Americans, and hence it cannot be used. And there is no compelling evidence of that educational benefit flows from a racially diverse group. No compelling reason that educational benefit, and this is Justice Thomas that specified this one. So I'm just kind of giving the timeline all the way from the 14th Amendment, through Brown v. Plessy Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education, and on and on and on, and all these different cases and all these different precedents. And now here we are. So let's start this way. I want to ask you, let's start with Kaizo here. So Justice Thomas, he is a beneficiary of affirmative action. So is he guilty of something by pulling the rug here, by being on the side of the concurring opinions? He's one of the 6 that voted that way, and he wrote a concurring opinion. People attacking Thomas, saying, hey, look, you there, Uncle Ruckus, you got this benefit. Why are you pulling the rug? Why are you pulling the ladder up? What is your just a general idea of that? And then LAR, and then Dr. Thunder, just on the Thomas aspect.
Yeah. So, okay. So just because affirmative action was there doesn't mean he actually benefited from it. Right? Because there's 2 different arguments here. Was he competent enough to actually receive all the benefits he got? And, it just happened that he was born and, let's say, groomed in the era of affirmative action versus the other elements. So I would have to get confirmation that he actually benefited from it. He scored lower than the whites, and that's why they had to pull him up by his bootstraps.
Now, let's say he actually did benefit from it, right? Does that compel him to then uphold the policy? Or what do you think about the attack? If you, Dr. Thunder, or Kaizo, still answering the question here, if you go ahead and you drink from that well, does that compel you to say, hey, this well has to be here, there's no removing of that well? What do you think about that particular kind of attack? I personally think it's an homonym. Just because I take Social Security doesn't mean that I agree that Social Security is the best way of achieving certain goals, let's say.
Yeah, so it depends. Did Black people help him get to areas? If they did, then yes, he's let them down. If he was kind of mostly supported by non-Black people, then no, he doesn't have anything to feel bad about.
Okay, that's good. That's good. LAR, what do you think about Thomas? He's the whipping boy, favorite whipping boy. Now, generally speaking, I think that just because someone is, there is a history of Black conservatives, right? They've always existed in there in the community. And by conservatives, I mean of the particular sort that will have certain, well, let's not even muddy the waters. Point being, he has a right to have his opinions, okay? But he's attacked as a Black man that, quote unquote, replaced Thurgood Marshall, even though that's not how it's not like people just go and replace other people, okay? But that's how it's seen, right? It's seen as, hey, you're in there with Thurgood Marshall, or, you're next in line, you came in there and you're messing everything up with your Uncle Ruckus ways, you're pulling the ladder up, you benefited from it, how dare you? What are your thoughts, LER?
I think he's the scapegoat. He's hypocritical, yeah, but he's the scapegoat also. Yes, he benefited from affirmative action when he was younger, and yes, they put him on blast for taking money from a billionaire to put his kids through school and pay for his mother's house, as if he was the only person in the government taking money from somebody richer than him. But for this particular scenario, he has to be the one that they put out front, which, he'll never say it's a racial element to that, which is, that's just his personality. He knows better. But his ruling, I mean, it was 6-3. I mean, let's be honest. It was 6 people were in favor. So he ain't the only one. It's not like it was 6 Clarence Thomases there. It was him and 5 other people. So as far as affirmative action, what it is, you know, we'll get. I'll get to that part later.
Yeah.
I'll finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Thunder, what are your thoughts about Justice Thomas in general and the attack that has kind of been brought against him regarding this? Now, when Kavanaugh was going through his process and sexual malappropriation, whatever malappropriatisms, he was accused of certain things. Somebody said, "Hey, if Kavanaugh is led into the court, now that'll have two sexual predators in the bench," which is kind of like crazy. It seems like there's a lot of hate for Clarence Thomas. Now he's a sexual predator. Like, I mean, come on, that's a bit much because of some Coke can hair, something from how many years ago. So there's general hate for this guy. And now there is, hey, you benefited from this thing and you're pulling the ladder up. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and you're breaking up from time to time.
Oh,
Just so you know. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's the, generally I like Clarence Thomas. Um, and actually, compare if you compare his ideas with the ideas of, say, a Malcolm X or other black nationalists, there's a lot that's in common with the way that he talks. And now, what they do in his case is they make it seem as though because he's aligned with Republicans or with conservatives or whatever, because he was put in by a Republican. What they do is they'll try to make it, they go with all of the conservative, black conservative, Uncle Tom, all of that. They go that angle. Notice that they don't do that with Malcolm X, though in many respects, it's very similar. Like Malcolm X also didn't think black folks should be taking stuff from the government. Matter of fact, in the Nation of Islam, you couldn't be on government assistance. You weren't allowed to be on government assistance. A word that was, that was very much frowned upon. So it's sort of interesting how the context, though the opinion is the same, the context seems to make people view his opinions differently. I mean, had it not been for Clarence, I mean, we've had a number of rulings that seem to be in a particular direction. You've got Roe v. Wade, overturning of that. You've got this. What was it? This gun. This, what was it? Is it in New York State? Was it New York State? Some. I don't remember the particulars. We talked about it, but that was a big case, and you have a number of other things that he's seeing, and we know how he's going to rule on those, and with the way that the court is constructed right now, he's just going to take a lot of heat because they're going to look at him as if he is the whole reason, but it's not just his opinions. It's the other folks' opinions that are also on the court. So,
Now, LAR mentioned 6-3, and then you just reiterated that point. And I went from the 14th Amendment, Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education, 1957 Justice Frankfurter talking about this stuff, 1978 Berkey versus. There's been a long history of conversation, if you will, which amount to legal precedents. Opinions written, both concurring and dissenting, depending on the conclusion that the court reached. And one thing that started coming up, one thing that's been inherent all through this, is that there has to be some kind of a sunsetting, some kind of a timeline to this. Now, regardless of whether you think LAR, I'm going to ask you this, and then Kaiser, and then Dr. Thunder again. Regardless of whether you think that affirmative action, the way it was actually practiced, worked out, do you think it's time for it to end and to try something else? Especially perhaps if you think it didn't work out for the people whom you wanted it to work out for. First of all, the question is, do you agree that things have to come to an end, right? That you cannot have in perpetuity some policy like this, right? For reasons which may be obvious. And then secondly, is it about time to end this particular experiment? Try something new. What are your thoughts?
In a general sense, the way this government runs, there are things that go on through perpetuity. Should this be one of them? At this point, no. I think they thought it was going to run for a while because they thought it was going to fix the quote unquote unfairness that caused it in the first place. But now it was just kind of like a race and gender hustle. So should it run now? No. But the thing about it is, I really truly think, and I've said this before, that all these other groups and genders are going to push for affirmative action again, because they're going to be on the short end of the stick now, so you might see another push for it again, because people thought, because this wasn't a black thing in the first place. A white lady started it with, like, a UT, and white women are the biggest benefactors of affirmative action. And then the Asian students, which made no sense. So now they're going to come up short, and then they're going to be right back in the court asking for something different.
Mm-hmm. So, Kaiser, what are your thoughts about an experiment or a tool such as affirmative action having some kind of end date, either A, because they've achieved what they're supposed to achieve, or B, they haven't achieved what they're supposed to achieve and it's time to stop it and try something else. C could be that they're causing more harm than good. As a matter of fact, that's what I think is part of a huge part of the opinion that came in 2023, this year. It's not what I think, it's what Justice Roberts said, basically saying that from 2003, it was stated that the policy cannot be used as a negative against the group. And now the Asian Americans have shown, like, look, it's a negative. It's not just a positive over here for somebody. It's a direct negative to me, right? So the sunsetting of these kinds of policies, what are your thoughts about it, Kaizo?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, affirmative action makes black men look bad, because it basically means we're not good enough, we're not smart enough to actually compete with everybody else. So we need to get a leg up by white supremacy. So ultimately, this is good news. It means that black men will finally get the recognition that they deserve. And the ones that wanted to race hustle and get themselves into these positions should have done it while it lasted. No good thing lasts forever.
No good thing lasts forever. Get in while the getting is good. Right? And now, the ball was in the air for a while there. Granted, some people took advantage of it. If you talk about you talk about 84% women, and also, to be honest, there are a lot of Africans out there.
Yeah, I think majority of the Ivy League students are actually 60-something% of them are Africans, and Africans make up only 10% of Black Americans. So as you see, it didn't even benefit the group that it purportedly was supposed to benefit. These Africans coming here, taking people's jobs and education. So I think it's a good thing. Now Black men can finally get it there by themselves. They don't have to have the white supremacy holding them up.
Yeah, the African has no qualms or no guilty conscience about cooning. Cooning does not exist in his vocabulary or his culture. He will go in there and coon his way to the top. That's just how these damn Africans are. However, Dr. Thunder, given all these factors, right, what do you think about the ending of this? Is this not perhaps a good thing, a clean state? Let's put an end to this thing and let's perhaps go find solutions, which is the next thing we'll get to. Solutions, what is now then to be done? Because the court did leave some outs. But anyways, go ahead. Sunsetting, ending of the stuff because it worked, because it didn't work? What are your thoughts? Can you hear me, Dr. Thunder? I think that it must be coming from your end, because Kaizo, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay.
I can
Yeah,
hear you.
Dr. Thunder, you kind of froze. You
Okay,
became
so it must
Elsa
be
for a
on my
moment.
side. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but your video
Yes.
looks like Elsa. Maybe you'd have to remove your video. Your
Okay, wait
video
a
is
minute. Here, let me do that. Is this better?
much better.
Ah,
It's time.
Much better.
let's-
Okay. All right. So let's just do it. There we go. We'll just do it this way. So and I noticed that there's a certain somebody early on trolling the panel for no reason. Not sure what that's about. But hey, that's how we do it. And apparently I was too stupid to know that Roberts was the the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So he's probably over there preparing a stream, clipping some stuff out of context. That's fine. That's how we do it. But anyhow, yeah, affirmative action is interesting because actually the primary recipients of affirmative action were not black men, right? So perhaps in the beginning, as a way to make up for slavery, redlining, Jim Crow, X, Y, and Z, for a short period of time, there was a focus on black men. But then Title IX goes in, and then now women are deemed as uh, uh,
Political
minorities,
minority.
right? As minorities, and then since they're minorities, now they can also receive, benefit from affirmative action. And so we know since then, 84% of the recipients have been white women, and so it's a lot of disingenuous talking against black people in general, but in talking against black men in particular, speaking as if black men have been getting all of these these jobs, and the white man has been helping the black man and all this kind of stuff, and that's actually not the case by the numbers. And then since women were considered minorities, black women get the double, they get the double credit there. So then now, if of the black folks that are getting helped disproportionately, they're women. And so black men, who again were the initial target for benefit, have not really been receiving any sort of benefit. Very little, we'll say, very little benefit. By the numbers, very little benefit. So, where does that put us? With this actually going down, is it actually all that negative for black men? I don't know that it's actually all that negative for black men, because we haven't really been the beneficiaries. And with these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs around the country, especially colleges and universities, it's been greatly to the detriment of black men, these programs, because of these, double credits that the universities get for having a woman that's black and then maybe that's also gay. So there's all these benefits that they get, and they get to check their boxes, and they get to act like they're not racist and see, look, we're good people, we're not racist, it's those people over there. They get to do all that posturing, but actually it doesn't actually fix the heart of the issue. It's actually expanded the issue. So in my estimation, this going away is not a is I don't think affects us like it's going to affect the other groups.
Do you have a
Now,
general opinion on
if affirmative
sunsetting of
action
policies?
would yeah, well, I'm good with sunsetting policies if the purpose of the policy has been fulfilled. But in affirmative action, since the objective was changed before it even got going and it never actually served the initial purpose, then um, I'd be more for repealing whatever, repeal Title IX, repeal whatever went in place that caused it to be interpreted the way that it's being interpreted, which is not to our benefit. But yeah, you can. I'm in general. I am a fan of you do something for a period of time. You do something temporarily. You see if it works. If it doesn't work, you make adjustments to it, or you repeal it. You wait a while. You try something again. So that's my general thing. In the case of this, it never really did what it was supposed to do in the first place because of other things that modified it. Take away those modifications, and then maybe you have something.
Now, essays can still be used to ascertain certain aspects of what may be called desirability of certain students. Now, I guess everyone is going to write about how they were inspired by Martin Luther King or how there are indeed, suffered all kinds of things. But there are other loopholes that the institutions still have to get people in. Now, let me ask this question here, because you have athletics and you have legacy. Okay. Those still exist as ways of getting people in there. That has not been challenged in the court. At least it hasn't risen to the level of the Supreme Court to my understanding. I may be wrong in that, right? But the 14th Amendment, Plessy v. Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education, all this history of this idea of equal protection under the law when it comes to university admissions and such does not address the fact that if your parents went to Harvard, all of a sudden that gives you a leg up, right? And also, if you are an athlete of a certain kind, which has a whole other kind of worms associated with it, because these guys are basically slaves to these institutions selling professional sports and treating these people like amateurs. LAR, should legacy and sports go down as well? And by the way, it's all about if you take federal money, by the way. No one is saying what you can do if you're completely private. But places like Harvard, they're really greedy. They like to take money, plus the fact that they also have a $50 billion endowment. So if you're going to take money and you cannot use racial preferences, well, should we get rid of legacy and athletics? What are your thoughts, Eliar?
I think Harvard isn't private, right? It's Ivy League.
It's a private institution, but
it isn't public. I mean, it isn't public. Legacies and athletic scholarships are going nowhere. Legacies bring money into the school, and so does athletics. They're going nowhere. Academic scholarships over the last, I would say, 10 to 20 years have become more and more, how can I say, they've raised the bar more and more for that. So it's harder to get an academic scholarship than it once was. So at the end of the day, that's probably the bigger issue, in my opinion, now, because sports pay and legacies pay. Legacies don't, and that's for Ivy League stuff like that, Harvard, Yale, Brown, Columbia, all that other stuff. But just be honest, when it comes to what makes the school money, 9 times out of 10, if it's not legacy, it's sports, predominantly football and basketball. So if you were to get rid of that, the school will probably go under. So I doubt they do anything with that at all.
Shout out to the super chatter. And I want you to react to this really quick, Dr. Thunder, before we continue the line of questioning with Kaiser here. But thank you very much. I don't have any sound effects. I don't know if you got something there, a little clap, Dr. Thunder, or something. But we got $10. Okay, from Deanie. Says, That Clarence Thomas is the most powerful black man in the world. Yale admitted him. George Bush appointed him. Less than a year of experience in the judiciary, if you will. Yet, talking point is black men don't benefit. Want to restate your quantities? 84%. Blah blah blah. Black men do benefit, and we did mention that Africans, for example, benefit. But how do you respond to this, Dr. Thunder, real quick? Oh, Dr. Thunder dropped off.
God dog it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to that, right? Because and this is why I think I wanted to kind of define what you mean by affirmative action. So the brother Thomas didn't really benefit from it from the, let's say, white supremacy pulling him up. He actually graduated 9th in his bachelor's, right? In his class, right? He got a cum notification. What he benefited from is a lack of racism preventing him from going to these schools like Yale. So that's a very separate argument whereby, let's say, you have not exactly quotas, but making it so that these schools can't just discriminate against you. So anyone saying, let's say, he benefited from affirmative action, sure, but not the way that I'm talking about, which is the issue, which is white supremacy pulling you up so that you can succeed.
And the point of the political appointment, a political appointment is a political appointment. It has nothing to do with selection criteria into some schools and whatnot, right? Like, you get appointed, like, so him being appointed by George Bush without having much experience. I believe George Bush also, I think it was Harriet Myers, or I forget her name. George Bush also appointed some lady. She didn't get appointed. He suggested some lady to Supreme Court that didn't have much either. But anyways, Dr. Thunder, how do you react? I see that you've kind of written something there. It's about a numbers thing, but just go ahead and react to this, and then we'll move on. Oh, you still can't hear me? Or we can't hear you? One way or the one way.
We can get his internet affirmative action. That's why I stopped working.
Yeah, I thought you guys you're out there in the studio in Ohio struggling. I'm out here in the middle of nowhere making it happen. But anyways, Kaizo, okay. What what are your thoughts regarding athletics, and perhaps focus on the legacy aspect? Okay, so your parents went to a particular school and now they give you a leg up to come in, and if we're saying that the principle here is you cannot use a selection criteria against a group, it cannot work negatively against a group, why don't we just clean the slate and say, if you're going to get federal money, everything needs to be simply equal? Now, I find it problematic, but my solution will be stop taking federal money. I think that, yes, if I want to bring in athletes, I should be allowed to bring in athletes and give them a leg up. But maybe I shouldn't be taking federal money then. But what are your thoughts, Kaiser?
Yeah, so I think my thoughts here is kind of like this, right? They're obviously going to take the money, because if they stop taking the money, then it's going to be fully private funded. And then now they're going to cry saying that all the rich alumni and the and the associates and anyone related to them is having all the leg up. So ultimately, I think there still has to be some kind of decorum. But yeah, I agree with you. The argument is sound. If you're going to be clean, just remove any sort of advantage. The issue is a lot of these parents do send donations to actually build certain wings and fund them. And if you don't give them certain benefits, well, what's the point? I'm not going to go sending $1 million to refurbish a wing if my kid isn't going to be automatically let into the school.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we already heard from you, LAR, basically saying like this thing's not going to go away. I tend to agree that, the athletics things, there are issues with it, but it's definitely not going to go away. And I don't think that we want to conflate it with the affirmative action thing too closely, right? Now, let's start thinking about solutions, okay? I want to start with you again, Kaiser, right? I think that trying to solve the equality problem, because this is all about equality, okay? And that's why I went from the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. And how do we right certain wrongs regarding some groups that did not get equal protection under the law, that were enslaved, that had a systematic destruction of their culture, such that the ways in which many groups that are, shall we say, subjugated can still rise typically is because they still have an intact culture, right? So you're like, oh, this particular group, Thomas Sowell, we know, does these studies, comparative studies. In this country, he talks about the Igbos over here in Nigeria, this particular group in China, or let's say the Jew, whatever. Some people get oppressed and then they're able to, in a generation or so, come back, right? But their culture is still intact, let's say. Now, to try to fix the issue by looking at admissions at the most elite of elites places seems to be insane to me, right? It's like, okay, there's an issue with people having their whole history and heritage destroyed, but let's see if we can get them into Harvard. It just seems it seems insane. So, how about Kaizo? We brainstorm here, starting with you, regarding some basic actionable things that can be done. It's been struck down from the Supreme Court. Go back to the drawing board, things that will actually uplift people. Because if we talk, for example, about the reading levels of Black boys, that's not going to be solved by affirmative action in Harvard. That's like that. So if you catch my drift, let's get Kaizo and then Dr. Thunder and then LAR on this.
Okay, so in regards to education, I do obviously know that funding is definitely important. So, and why I say this is because obviously kids psychology, it's not about the absolute lack of resources, but more or less, your kids grow up in an area where there's rich kids and you're the poor kids. There's always that kind of difference. Point is here, right? Change the way that schools are funded. Have a state-funded education system, regardless of the area. Each school, depending on the students and needs, pretty much gets equal amount of money. Federally funded schools from the government, as opposed to sort of regional, very so-called localized regional sort of funding. I think that's going to help a lot.
Fine. So that's number one. And let me just kind of shed a little bit more light on that, because right now that this affirmative action thing has been beat back and everyone says, okay, cool. Yeah, everything's now equal protection under the law. Affirmative action was a failed experiment and it negatively impacted the Asians and so on and so forth. Now everything is cool. But the thing is, zip codes still exist, and zip codes still are kind of segregated, mostly by choice, let's say, right? And within those zip codes, you're going to have rich people, rich areas, and not so rich areas. And the degree to which the school is funded by property taxes is going to affect the educational outcomes one way or the other. I know that we can pull out examples of the crazy African kid reading with a candle light from his neighbor's house, leaning in the neighbor's window, reading with a fire. And yeah, those guys exist. But overall, if a school district is better funded, you're going to get better outcomes, generally speaking, because also of all the reinforced types of things about, the middle class type of values, respectability, politics, if you will, of the people actually not sagging their pants and whatnot. Yeah, let's cue in Bill Cosby to tell us about all those things that people in the middle class tend to also have that is correlated with their success. But that this zip code type of segregation will just continue to perpetuate the legacy type of the discrimination. But anyways, land your plane and let's go to Dr. Thunder.
Yeah, exactly, right. And also, obviously, I also think another element is where you mix up the kids, right? Not even, let's say you have the equal funding, right? However you're going to do that criteria, it's not the point right now. Mix up the kids as well, right? Make them exposed to different types of students, different kinds of learning structures and styles. Yeah, more or less actually have quotas on percentages, right? If as long as it's economically viable, mix these kids up so that they're not just around other blacks and then being unable to move up the social ladder. Let them be exposed to the other kids who are a little bit more superior.
Okay, well said. Dr. Thunder, want to check your audio real quick?
Yeah, it should be better now, hopefully.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure what was going on there, so I don't know, and I don't know how much of what I said was heard, because it seems like I was probably dropping out quite a bit.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Dr. Thunder, first answer the question on the table, and I want to take a step back to one of the things that you missed there. This is regarding solutions, and I think that there's a hyper focus, and I think it's symbolic almost. It almost falls within the realm of that symbolic shall we say, solution. So symbolic in the sense that you're looking at the peak of the peak, talking about people going to Harvard or not, right? And that's not really going to help. That's not really going to solve your problems, not even in practical terms. Because some people say, "Oh, but Harvard, that's where all the leaders go to." Most CEOs, Dr. Thunder, it will not surprise you to know that most CEOs do not go to Ivy League. Okay, you don't have to go to Ivy League to get things done in the world. As a matter of fact, it might even work against you. For the actual real movers and shakers out here who are actually doing things and not just fitting into the machine, it is the case, yes. There's certain cogs in the machine that require you to have an Ivy League, and we can talk about that separately. It's a certain kind of elitism whereby, oh, we want you to check this box because we know that in order for you to check this box, you're probably gone through the right kinds of families and you know the right type of people, and we like to keep our people in this box. But it's not what moves the world. So trying to get more people into that Ivy League when there's a real broad base of people that need help, that need a leg up, it seems to me to be a little bit of a red herring, if you will. But Dr. Thunder, how about solutions? What are some grassroots type of solutions that we can look at outside of looking at Ivy League admissions?
Boys' schools, for Black boys only schools. I mean, we know that in school system where there are no girls and perhaps female teachers, but where they have to prioritize and tailor their the educational product to the boys, they greatly benefit and they do better at the next level. And this research has been known for a long time, but for whatever reason, it's not being championed or supported by the Black feminists, for instance. So the Black feminists, they complain that the boys are reading at a 8th grade level and all this stuff. They actually know, based on the research, anybody would know this, that if you have boys only schools for Black boys, they're going to do a lot better, and it's going to eliminate a lot of those reading issues and a lot of being able to go to college, based on academic, results and all that kind of thing.
You say boys only schools, and then you put a hyphen for Black boys. What exactly are you saying? Is it a boys only school for Black boys? Is it a Black boys only school?
Well, I guess it's going to depend on what part of the country you're talking about. Based on zip code, you're going to probably have more black boys. I mean, people live where they want to live. If you had some options that were funded by the state, then that would mean that disproportionately folks would go to schools that were closer to where they live. Now, I also like the idea of schools of choice, where as long as you can get your kid to the school, maybe there's no busing, but if you can get your kid there, then the state pays. I like that. And so then you can isolate, you can locate, a couple different schools that you're like, hey, the academics are better here, or they have a really strong, I don't know, Spanish program for some reason. Your kid has a real interest in speaking Spanish. And then as long as you can get them there, then great. But usually what's going to happen is people tend to live in neighborhoods with other people that tend to look like them. And so that's sort of the de facto, that's going to be what it is. And so, but the reason I'm specific about that is because that's actually my interest. The reason I'm saying Black boys is because those are the boys that seem to be the ones that are not doing as well. And if we're going to focus, let's be specific. This is one of the issues that I have with how affirmative action got sort of repurposed. They put Title IX in, and then now the original purpose of it is diminished. I'm actually more of a fan of saying, okay, here's a certain problem. We're going to laser focus on this particular problem until it becomes a strength. Then let's look around for some other issues to solve, rather than the sort of throw everything in the same bucket and then do this sort of general thing, which disproportionately has been to Black men and boys to our detriment.
Mm-hmm.
it's not worked out. This whole the whole intersectional thing, the whole, you're a woman, you're black, you're gay. Okay, we're gonna consider them before we consider you're just a regular straight black, black kid, black boy. We're not going to consider you as, being marginalized, whatever the term they want to use. So that's one thing. And I wanted to respond to Deanie. Thanks for the $10 support there. With the Clarence Thomas is the most powerful black man and blah, blah, blah. And he received affirmative action. And so blah, blah, blah. So black men don't benefit. And then he claimed later that now I'm a bootstrap bro because I'm saying that because affirmative action disproportionately has not helped black men, and 84% of the recipients have been white women. And then if you dig and disaggregate the numbers, you'll discover that of that remaining 16%, black men are going to be a very, very small percentage of that remaining 16% because of the double minority or whatever credit. So you're going to end up in the same. You end up in a situation where black men aren't actually served, and they definitely have not been served the way that the media tries to make it look. And one criticism that I have of conservatives, and I've said this over and over, is with all of this pushback apparently against like CRT and the rainbow, and pushback against all of this stuff, Negroes don't realize is that they're pushing back against you just as much as they are pushing back against these other things, and so with this boycott against Bud Light and this boycott against Target like this, what they do is they add all of this stuff together. And so when they're actually talking against, they're saying, well, we're tired of these cultural Marxists. We're tired of them doing X, Y, and Z. We're not going to allow this anymore. They're actually putting you in stuff like affirmative action, even its original purpose. They're putting that as part of what they're actually pushing back against. And this is part of why I say that in either of the political parties, black men don't really have a place to go, because the conservatives, when they push back against certain things that perhaps black men are like, hey, I'm more of a conservative person. Not that I'm politically conservative, but I'm more into traditional family values. I'm more into X, Y, and Z. I'm a Christian. I believe in traditional marriage. I believe like this. And so black men might feel like, hey, I like that they're pushing back against a lot of the rainbow mafia stuff. But while they're doing that, they're also pushing back against you. They're pushing back against you too. So it's tough to totally celebrate that, because when you listen closely, you recognize that it's you that they're pushing back against also. Hopefully that was clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that takes my mind to certain places regarding the kinds of political alliances that you form and the terms under which you form them. Otherwise, if you do not actively, put yourself into a group positively, and then you just passively get lumped in, a lot of times doesn't redound to your benefit. However, good answer. Next, we'll go to LAR with the same question on the table, but I want to do a kind of a quick kind of summary / to see where we're at, right? So LAR, the question is about solutions, right? Because we're talking about Black boys reading, let's say, and we're talking about things like such as your position in the in Silicon Valley, or and other tech startups, or in finance, or being able to get financing for your ideas. And very little of these things depend on going to Ivy League schools. Okay. Now, there's a separate whole conversation that could be had about how people use meritocracy to keep certain kind of oligarchy going on, where it's like, oh, you got to go to this particular school in order to work at my law firm, okay? Because we all are Harvard men, or we're all Yale men over here. But in reality, it's not necessarily you don't have to go to Harvard to do that work, and you could go to somewhere else and become an even more successful lawyer than having to go to that particular cog in the machine. that's where we're at. We're asking about solutions, and Kaizo mentioned some. Dr. Thunder talked about only boys schools, right? Schools for boys, right? Kaizo talked about the zip code situation, right? And then LAR, we're going to go to you next. But first, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about affirmative action being struck down 6-3. We gave the history, right, from the 14th Amendment, which basically says equal protection under the law. So that is the arena around which this conversation is happening, is that equality under the law, equality under the law. Plessy versus Ferguson was about that as well. It said separate but equal, and that was a bad decision, universally recognized in hindsight as so, right? But it stood for a while, almost 60 years, until in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education kind of said, look, public education must be equally made available, right? Blah, 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 right? And then the idea of the sunsetting of affirmative action being something that cannot last forever and cannot be used negatively against a particular group started being talked about in 2003. And then 20 years later, it's been struck down based on the fact that, hey, it cannot last forever. And it has been shown to negatively affect certain groups. And the next question that's going to come up, Dr. Thunder, is the educational benefits to a diversity, which Mr. Thomas, Clarence Thomas, said in his concurring opinion that he cannot find this benefit. He said, I feel like there's a benefit, which I think he's BSing. I don't really think he feels there's a benefit, okay, to diversity, but he can't find it. But LAR, what are your thoughts on some solutions here to the actual problems?
Well, one solution I can come up with is, since it's about the idea or ideal of competition and meritocracy, take name, race, gender off of college admissions, and there's just a straight number. Just a straight number. The college will not know your name, will not know your gender, will not know your race. They just know a number, and your numbers, your number is tied to everything you did in high school, all your grades, all grades, test scores, da 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 da. But no name, no race, no gender. So now people can't say they're feeling discriminated against, and people can't, on the flip side, feel like they're superior to people and feel like these dumb people got in and I didn't, because what's going to wind up happening is it's going to actually be a competitive environment. And these colleges can't, discriminate either, because they can only accept you. They don't know who they're getting as far as name, race, or gender. They just see the quote unquote mind since it's about academia. So that's my solution.
Mm-hmm. So, and all these, okay. Let me ask you, Kaizo. Some point around 2003, after the University of California got its quota system kind of beaten by a case called Becky versus University of California, one of the compelling reasons given by the university system for why they should have their affirmative action was that educational benefits flow from a diverse student body. Can you steel man that position, Kaizo? It's one of those things that sounds good. It's one of those things that sounds like, yeah, these white boys will do better if they have black friends and brown friends and can use chopsticks and whatever. It seems like it's just better. And they call it educational benefits. Now, education is a loose term there. I think that was put in there as a fluff type of reason. And people have repeated it as a fluff type of like, yeah, it's good to be diverse, right? But can you actually point to where you think there might be educational benefits to diversity? I don't see it in the STEM area, right? I don't see how really you could get, but what are your thoughts, Kaizo? And then we'll go to our resident professor here, Dr. Thunder, to say, hey, do you think that there are actually educational benefits to a diverse student body? Kaizo, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would say there are studies now. Obviously they're cited by liberals so they might be skewed towards a certain direction. Yeah, there are several studies that show diversity definitely improves performance and outcomes in both education and job marketplace. Now, the logics that they use is that when you're in a diverse marketplace, what happens is you're now able to integrate your knowledge of unique, let's say, cultural motifs, and that would actually, in this case, for job performance, yield a better understanding of your market base. So there is some studies to actually show, a little bit more diversity allows you to kind of engage.
May I interject here for just what just came to mind was a kind of a group level versus individual level, because this is something that often gets lost a lot of times in these conversations. Group level solutions versus individual level solutions. It is beneficial to you as an individual if you have some particular skill that you learned in the streets of Harlem regarding numbers. I don't know, right? Some kind of a thing, some kind of a way of doing things, and you bring it into the marketplace, and now you have an edge. But to say that if I bring you and all these other people together, that everybody benefits from an educational standpoint, right? That somehow the white kid gets a better education because there was a kid from Harlem there, I find to be kind of a stretch. Your particular idiosyncrasies regarding your background might help you individually. I don't know. And when I say I don't know, I really mean I don't know. It's just the thought that came to my mind. But I don't really know if it stretches all the way to like a group level thing where if I bring all these people from Harlem, all of a sudden I'm going to be better educated. But go ahead, finish your point.
Yeah, I don't think there's any sort of direct, relational sort of stuff that can be linked to what you just mentioned there. However, what I could say is this, if I interlink it with African education, right? You're bringing, let's say in Kenya, for example, there's obviously different tribes and more or less different races. And if you have the people from the north and you mix them with the people from the south, etc., what that does allow is integration and a creation of a nation state, an idea of, let's say, nationality. So I think there is definitely an element when it comes to education. Education is not just about, well, are you going to score better on the exams, but are you going to be indoctrinated in the ways of your nation state? So from that angle, I definitely think there's a net positive in trying to at least bring diverse groups together and create a national identity. And I think obviously that's what would then allow you to operate in a larger market base when you go to work in a more cohesive way, because at least you've now scratched on each other, you've waxed, the bolts and nuts and all that stuff.
Excellent. Okay, so Dr. Thunder, you're next on this here, and this is about the educational benefits that come from a diverse student body. And Kaizo, I think, in his attempt to steelman it, brought it down to the level of democracy, in the sense that in a democratic situation, and I know that you said, Kaizo, that you want to indoctrinate the people in the ways of your nation, but in a democratic situation, one of the ways of the nation is this idea of diversity, the idea of tolerance, right? The idea of one man, one vote, that kind of a thing. Okay. So democratic, liberal, Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic type societies. One of the things that we want to do is inculcate habits that make people tolerant of each other. So we want to expose them to other people. And we see this to be a good. Now, to call that an educational benefit is still a stretch, and to saddle the universities with that responsibility, I think, is also a stretch, right? But what do you think, Dr. Thunder, about this supposed educational benefit that comes from a diverse student body?
Yeah, it's sort of a circular argument. So, because they keep saying diversity is our strength, you can't really pin it down. Why is diversity a strength? Because actually, diversity in itself is not a strength. It's when you have something in common that you can all be pulling towards. That's when you have a strength. And it's not been established that if you have a diverse population, that you'd be able to pull harder for something in common. I don't know that there's evidence of that. So then they're basically front loading it and saying, well, since that's our goal, our objective, and we haven't said that it would be, we haven't proven why this would be a good thing or that it would be more effective, then they say, well, in order for the workers to be able to work in an environment in an environment where there's a bunch of other people that come from different cultural backgrounds, you're not going to be able to communicate well unless you have some experience dealing with them at some level. And so then now they put that, so it's just I have a challenge with that. I would rather people say we really should be about equal access. Okay. Let's make that the focal point in this diversity is our strength nonsense that can go somewhere else. And you can say, look, all of these people are paying taxes, and so they should be able to have equal access to the system. Okay. To the extent that they don't have equal access to the system, that's a problem, because it's like taxation without representation. Okay. So let's do whatever we have to do to the structure so that we can give them equal access. But equal access does not mean that everyone is going to choose a certain line of appointment, or they're not going to choose a certain discipline. And you can't control that. You cannot control that. This is the problem that I have with the idea of equity, right? So equity claims that you can get some sort of equal outcome. No, well, you're not going to get an equal outcome. Okay, I suppose you could take a look at the numbers in one sense to indicate if anything that you're doing, if a policy that you're putting in is having any kind of effect or impact at all. You could look at the numbers, but if the numbers don't equal, that's not an indication that there's some sort of inherent bias against a certain kind of person. A certain kind of immutable characteristic. It could just be that people with those immutable characteristics, based on cultural X, Y, and Z, they just don't tend to desire to do certain things at a certain level. I mean, we have the same issue with a lot of these women's issues. So if you're born XX, it's highly likely that stuff like STEM is not going to necessarily be your thing. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't find some, but you could make it as open and give people as much access as you want, and they still may not choose that. And it's not an indication that there's something wrong with the system because you don't have the same numbers. But you could look at the numbers to see if by putting certain policies in place, if it's had any impact at all. I just don't like when they make the evaluation, well, you guys are a bunch of misogynists because women are not choosing to be in STEM. That seems to be a huge jump.
Mm-hmm. So LAR, you see, Justice Thomas wrote in his opinion that he's been struggling to find this educational benefit that flows from a diverse student body, but he can't find it. He wrote something in there which I consider to be a little bit of BS. He said he feels like there's a benefit. And maybe that feeling is what we've been kind of what Kaiser tried to get at, in the sense that it is a priori value. And that's what Dr. Thunder also said. It's something we bring in, right, Dr. Thunder? Like, we bring in as democracies the notion that diversity, tolerance, democracy, these types of things are good. Relativism, live and let live, laissez-faire, it's good. It is not something, it is an a priori value that we bring in, okay? And then we then say, okay, we did the circular thing. So I see your point there, Dr. Thunder. So there were 6 opinions. Robert wrote his opinion. By the way, Ketanji Brown Jackson recused herself because I believe she worked at some board at Harvard. But she also wrote a dissenting opinion, even though she kind of recused herself from the voting or something like that. Anyways, do you agree, LAR, with Clarence Thomas that he struggles to find how this diversity really makes your education better? What are your thoughts on that?
Does it make the education better? The books are the books. The books, you commit to what's in those books makes your education better. But I would say if you wanted to be a capitalist or a politician, the diversity makes you better because you know how to sell multiple cultures and you know how to dog whistle multiple cultures. But if that's not your thing, then not necessarily. It depends on the field you're going to. Maybe medical, it might help you because you're gonna probably have to deal with everybody. But no, like if you're working in a lab, doing science, knowing multiple cultures might not help you that much. I mean, unless you're doing like DNA testing or something like that. But no. People
Speaking
don't
of
care about
studies,
people like that.
speaking of studies in the labs and stuff like that, it was shown that actually diversity hurts certain types of work groups like that, because it's like, just imagine you, LAR, right? You're a science guy, okay? You put on your lab coat, and you're used to working with your folks, let's say, right? You know that they're good because this is an objective measuring criteria, but you also trust them a little bit more, right? Because you know that this is your guy from your hood, and you guys studied whatever together, blah blah blah. Okay, yeah, okay. Now they bring in this Korean with an accent, blah blah blah. You don't trust that guy as much, right? The Korean with the accent, whatever, as much as you trust Brandon from the hood, whom you also know is good because you have objective criteria.
Hurry up and
They
buy.
they show that the trust level within these kinds of groups goes down. And as a matter of fact, it's better if you team up with Brandon and compete against the Korean group, and then everybody's standards goes up. Like if you actually stay insular with your group fighting against the Indian group, then the Indians will do better and you will do better because that competition. Okay, now these are simplistic types of experiments that don't really kind of. Go ahead, Eliar.
In a nutshell, what it actually is if you get into a diverse group, you're going to spend more time deconstructing everybody's assumptions and stereotypes instead of getting to work. So that becomes the bigger problem. That's why it's better to be in your own group that because if you diversify the group, the Korean gonna have a certain thing about the black person. The black person might have a certain thing about the Korean person. Now they got to work out this BS instead of getting to the task at hand. You get what I'm saying? So that's normally what happens. Or if you're in a group of four and you're the man out on the, in that sense, they can team together against you while they're in the group, and it has nothing to do with the actual task. So that with people, that's how it goes.
With people, that's how it goes. Okay, Dr. Thunder, this is a question that we touched on. There are a couple of questions that we touched on in our previous conversation about affirmative action, our most recent conversation, the only other conversation about affirmative action we've had on this show, Case Closed, where we have the highest level conversation, the most relevant topics out here. And it has to do with taking advantage of. I alluded to it before. Taking advantage of affirmative action. And also there's the dignity question, which certain type of individualist conservatives bring up. Say, look, affirmative action, especially when it is permanent, right, is an affront to the dignity of people. Let's not dwell on that aspect. I think that one is kind of straightforward, right? Okay, it shouldn't be permanent because if it fixes, we don't want to have a permanent underclass of permanent people that are permanently in crutches. It's not cool. But how about the idea of not fumbling the ball the next time, right? So let me put it this way. The Federalist Society, whom, generally speaking, anyone who's not familiar with the Federalist Society should go look them up. They are a group of kind of, we shall call them, from a constitutional standpoint, conservative, originalists, they call themselves, people like the late Antonin Scalia and whatnot. And they have had a 40 or 50-year march towards changing certain things. And we've seen some of the benefits, some of their victories recently, whether it be Roe v. Wade or all these other things. Their whole thing is to be in law schools and train these lawyers in their original intense type of interpretation of the Constitution, the conservative, non-expansive interpretation of the Constitution, and get these people into Supreme Courts. And they actually did that. Okay. So, and then now it's time for maybe the Democrats to fight back by maybe packing the court, let's say, which has been tried before and can be done again. It'll be interesting to see how this, conservative majority is going to be pushed back against by the other side. They could try to pack the court. But the idea is if we are going to move forward, Dr. Thunder, and make sure that these solutions that you talked about, such as the schools, right, are not completely, we don't, what do you think are the right means? What apparatus? Is it a political thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to go form this political coalition with this group here? Is it this kind of non-governmental organizations like such as the Federalist Society? I brought up the Federalist Society because they're an example of a group that started, did a 50-year march, and boom, victory. Like they've stayed at it this whole time. They have an agenda. They push the agenda. Dr. Thunder, you mentioned laser focus on something, but there's what kind of political vehicle? I don't have anything in mind. This is just a question here. I'm just asking, appealing to your intuition there. That what are the kinds of political vehicles that will make sure that this actually stays a focus and follows all the way through in the same way that something like the Federalist Society stayed there? They have a brand, they have a name. You know it's a Federalist Society. You know what they're about, and they've been there for 60 years now.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I do think it has something to do with caucusing. You know, you have to get enough folks that have your particular perspective so that you can put something in place that is not going to move. And that has been a challenge for Black men. You know, admittedly, that's been a challenge for Black men. But part of the reason it's been a challenge is because the apparatus that exists seems to be set up, and the policies that get passed seem to be disproportionately not to our benefit. And you have that happen enough, and I think you start to sort of alienate and you start to alienate a lot of folks that would likely be involved in the political process. But you have to do something about that. And I've said this before. I mean, you have to be willing to caucus with who you can caucus with.
Okay, so let me say something right there with you there, Dr. Thunder. So let's say it's I want to caucus with, I'm going to bring it down to an individual business level, right? Okay, I'm a business. Okay, I'm a Black man. Let's just say I'm a Black man and I'm in business. I've done certain right things to get myself in certain situations, and I see that women have this particular box that they have that they can check, right? And if I team up with a woman, I can get this government contract, which, by the way, I've done before, or it's a common type of thing. Okay, so that is a way of kind of caucusing. Now, but there tends to be a kind of against that will be like some kind of a purist notion of, we don't caucus with these types of groups because I'm not trying to do the intersectional thing. But so what do you think about this Machiavellian? Hey, I don't care, LGBTQ, MYXC, woman, whatever. I'm caucusing. I'm checking boxes. I'm getting mine. What are your thoughts?
So I think the challenge has been, and I've talked about like throwing everything into the same bucket. So you throw everything into the same bucket because the benefit of that is numbers. So you get more numbers, but what the sort of policies that you pass are only going to sort of generally, if you're being equal and fair, it's only going to generally serve the people that are in the bucket. And if some folks that are in the bucket need more assistance and or require different particulars, of course, everybody in the bucket does, because they're all individuals, at one level, and their groups are distinct from other groups. So if that is the case, then you end up watering down the results, especially for those that actually are the most marginalized in the bucket. And so that's what you've seen with the issues of black men and boys, is that as Black men and boys have caucused with the Rainbow, caucused with other initiatives in the Democratic Party, a lot of the issues that are important to us have not been served as well. And so that's sort of the frustration I think that Black men have with caucusing, in particular with Democrats. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't caucus with Democrats. I'm not saying that we shouldn't caucus with Republicans. I think we can caucus with who who has a particular, I don't know, agenda or philosophy that seems to line up with what it is that we're most interested, what's most important to us. Now, so that's my general thing, and I don't tell. It's not my goal or my role or desire to tell people what to do. I'm not saying you need to do this and you need to do that. And if you're not aligned the way that I am, and if you don't have the opinion that I have, then there's something wrong with you. I'm just here to say that I think that there are some different options that we could look at that may not have been the traditional options. With respect to affirmative action, my approach to fixing a problem is, as I said before, is the laser focus on the problem. It's not to sort of take the attention away from the really primary issue because other people are trying to get your attention and they want something too, to the point where you can't really focus on that one deal. So, I have, folks have tried to troll me by saying, hey, you work for a university, so that means that you benefited from affirmative action. And I'll say, well, it's possible that people looked at me because the institution did have certain policies. I'm not eliminating that as a possibility. But what actually got me hired is because there were individuals that were on the committees that were hiring that they themselves had a really specific focus. I want to get more brothers in here. I want to get more. I need folks that can do the job, but we want more representation. So I'm going to sell out and really specifically focus on that issue. And that's how I ended up with the position that I have. It's not as much because the institution itself had some sort of diversity policies, because you can show how at colleges and universities, you can show that black men are there's 20,000, 25, 30,000 more black females in the academy than black males. It's because of the structure that they use, which is supposed to benefit everybody in the bucket. It is benefiting certain groups in the bucket a lot more than others. And so in order to try to fix that issue, you have to say, okay, I recognize that this is an issue. And then you yourself as an individual, as a chair, as a committee member, have to push for whatever your personal agenda is. And that's how the stuff actually happens. In my mind, I mean, when I got my job, there were 70 applicants and seven finalists for the position, and many of which had degrees that I did not have at the time. When I took the job, at the institution I'm at, when I took that job, I didn't have a doctorate. I had a master's degree, which was enough for me to get my foot in the door. But there were a bunch of folks that had doctorates, and the chair of the search committee and the other people in the committee, they had to say, well, what's most important? And they had to make that decision. Now, you would think that the diversity thing, that would run stuff. But what I have seen as serving often in these committees is that you can tell if somebody's a woman or not. But it's hard to tell what ethnicity a person is based on their name. And so often is the case is you get a lot of women in for these, as finalists, but then the committee still ends up doing the same stuff that they would have done anyway. And so you think that it's going to, lead to certain kind of numbers, but it doesn't. So
okay, so let me so on the point of teaming up, right? On the point of teaming up, and in the Machiavellian approach, I know you brought up the aspect of, okay, well, what policies are we teaming up for? So on the Democrat Democratic Party, right? There's certain bills like that black men that are, that would serve black men presumably, and are voted against by conservatives for conservative reason, Republicans. Some might say they're racist reasons as well, right? Do you in that let's see, I believe there was a George Floyd bill, after George Floyd, to something similar like that. Are there any bills that are on the Democratic side that you would say, hey, uh, I don't like all these other things around it, but I'm going to join this coalition? Because, by the way, let's say the Federalist Society, they're open to play ball from time to time with whichever side in whichever particular election is going to benefit them, right? So, that question I ask you right now is a rhetorical one, but I want to make a statement, and then I want to see what your reaction to it is. The statement is this: like, in order to, if there's something going on with any particular elite, the only way to change it is to build a better elite. That means that you are going to consistently, just like the Federalist Society, have a body that recruits people. In other words, it attracts talent because it is cool, it has better ideas, and it has solutions. And by cool, I literally mean that, because we're social creatures. In other words, people think it's cool to go to Davos. That's why they go there. Or there are other, shall we say, competing factions in terms of who's going to have global hegemony in terms of these corporate global entities, right? If you form Dr. Thunder's conference, and Dr. Thunder's conference is the cool spot to be, because they have real elites, meaning by elite I mean people who are good at what they do, as you would use elite basketball players, let's say. And you build this thing, you have the best, the best and brightest legal students, as in the case of the Federalist Society. You attract them in there. You have your little committees, your little clubs in the universities, and so on and so forth. And over a long period of time, all that to say that all that seems very unattractive, because it's a long period of time, and it tends to be, let me know what you think about this, Dr. Thunder, a notion that things should happen quicker, right? Or things should, well, why should, or people should see the justice of my position, and hence things should happen that way. And that this idea of me building this thing that is going to be attractive and attract to certain types of people and stay consistent with it is just, that's BS. This thing, and I'm not just saying this for, let's say, like a FBA ADOS issue. Generally speaking, in any group that is kind of struggling, there's always a faction that sees this: I have to create a new club with new velvet ropes that attract new people in there, become cool, have better ideas, be a better elite, right? There's a notion that maybe it's too hierarchical, it's non-egalitarian, things should flow from a moral place, and things should have blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Thunder? What I just said, if it makes sense regarding solving problems, you need to build a better elite. It takes a long time, using the Federalist Society as an example, for example.
Yeah, I mean, you can build your own organization. I get that. Building your own organization is going to take a lot of time. It's going to be, it's going to be expensive, take a lot of time, and probably make it, so that, whatever agendas, whatever stuff that you want to actually see happen, it's going to make it even a longer process to get to that end, rather than just partnering with powers that be, as it were. Mm-hmm. Okay, I get that. I mean, of course, the other approach to this is just to, threaten to burn everything down, right? And
yeah,
I would argue that, see, with the civil rights movement, I would argue that an aspect, and of course, white folks are not comfortable with this idea, and a lot of white folks, they were like, hey, I like Martin Luther King because he's talking about the, kumbaya, freedom, respect your fellow man, and he's doing it the peaceful way. And they didn't like Malcolm X or Stokely Carmichael or H. Rap Brown or any of the really militant sort of civil rights leaders, but many believe that the reason that things changed was not really because of the folks that were being friendly and kind. It was really because of the folks that are saying, look, if you don't do something, we're going to burn, everybody's going to get some, and we burning everything down.
And to be fair, they had that power because of a certain set of circumstances. It was like, you know, the Cold War, really. In other words, there was a lot of fuel and kindling. It could be burnt down, but if you agitate, because the whole country was kind of, you get what I'm saying, right? You could come in with your communistic agitation and really rock the boat. In this situation, I don't think, you correct? What do you think? I don't think that black men have that kind of power at this point.
No, of course not.
Threaten anything.
Yeah, no, of course not. I mean, so really, and I've said this over and over, we have three options. One is we have to look at the Democrats, look at what policies, what agendas that we can partner with, that we can caucus with there. We have the Republicans, look at what policies and agendas that they have that we could caucus with. You have third party. I mean, I'm a third party guy. And you know, really, and then I said three options, really four options. Fourth option is you don't vote, you don't participate. Now, I know a lot of folks think that not participating, that's just a waste and everything else, and perhaps it is, but it's not for anyone else to tell those individuals what they should do. So, you know, but these are the options. You know, I have said where I'm at with it, third party, and third party is kind of like trying to build another elite, as you suggested, and it's slow and it takes a lot of time, and then you have to still be willing to partner with agendas, policies, and politicians from Democrats and Republicans, and you know, the whole local thing and work in the local system. But as an individual, the results that I have seen with respect to diversity, quote unquote, actual diversity, and in particular promoting a particular population, right, have been when I just said, look, this is an issue. I'm going to hire folks based on X, Y, and Z, and I'm not going to feel bad about it, because when you look at the statistical breakdown across the country in certain kinds of positions, there's a certain population is marginalized. So I'm just going to sell out for whatever that constituency is, and that's just going to be what it is. And now I'm going to do it in such a way that I'll be able to defend doing it. So I'm going to, obviously you have to find qualified folks, but in my mind, it's never really been an issue of are there qualified folks. The issue is the way that the system is set up. It makes it too easy to overlook the people that are qualified, and then to blame, and then to claim that, hey, we did what we were supposed to do. We checked our boxes. We did our quota systems. We did X, Y, and Z, but you still don't end up with the folks that are most marginalized, because you have this hierarchy of other folks. And in these days now, it's a lot of the list is based on stuff that's not even immutable characteristics.
Well answered there. Let me say something, a capstone on the idea of forming these organizations. And I've been using the Federalist Society as an example, right? One might say, okay, well, what real life examples do you have of these, in terms of, because I'm talking about things that maybe at this point they have to start at the individual level. And by individual, I mean some individual out there with their elite self, because again, this is about elites. This is not about the average dumbass, right? It's not their calling. It's not what they're supposed to do, right? It's about the elite, and they have their elite set of skills and whatnot, and they're going to try to foster certain types of change. Now, there's a certain type of change that within Africa, Africans need to promote intra-African trade between nations to reduce the dependency on the dollar for many, many, many reasons. Okay, one of which is so that you're not starving because you're having to only produce cash crops because you're exporting these cash crops to these other nations, and so that you can get dollars to buy some other thing that you actually need. There's a loop there when it comes to the need of the dollar, because the dollar is the reserve currency. Really what it means is it has the deepest liquidity. It's the only thing that people will generally accept, right? You cannot just go to your neighbor and say, hey, I'll give you my currency, because your neighbor's like, no, I'll only sell this to you in dollars. Now, there's certain small groups that have been, one small group that has been formed in that regard, Pan-African Alliance, whereby, people are looking into, on a very small scale, trading by barter, palm oil for some other goods. And when you trade by barter in this regard, you cut off the need for the dollar mediating it. This is the kind of thing that it's really small right now, and it's really okay. It's gonna help me and my palm oil business, okay, and that's about 99% of the reason why I'm doing it. But I also understand that it doesn't even really matter why I'm doing it. The point is, if you don't take action because you don't think that you're going to see the fullness of the glory of the benefits in your lifetime, you might never take action, right? There are these things which are generational in nature. I give 50 years with the Federalist Society as an example. There is a tendency, and this is not just to repeat what I said before, of everybody to say, hey, why should I even start if I'm not going to start at the top? I say, hey, create a new elite class with your other club that is going to suck people away from going to Davos and go to your conference instead. And like, but Davos will always be at the top. It's like, dude, you have to start from somewhere. Maybe you're number 30, okay? But you got to start from somewhere. You can't just complain that you're not number one and then not do anything. There's a liturgy that comes along with that. There has to be a notion that I do things because they're correct. And this is, again, amongst elite people. This is not, this is a direct target to those of you whom are elite in one way or the other. You need to understand that the only way to replace the existing elite is with new elites, and that the existing order requires elite talent. In other words, things don't just happen. People need elite engineers. They need elite technologists. They need new people to come up with new ways of making things more efficient, and so on and so on and so on, right? Hence, they have their little cliques which they attract this talent to them, right? So it's not some kind of thing where it's like, oh, the game is sewn up. You can attract these people to yourself. You can decide that, hey, maybe within this particular border here, as I'm talking about, between Ghana and Togo, in my particular example, we find a way to do this barter thing so that we don't have to depend on the dollar. Is this de-dollarization? No, that's not going to happen in another 100 years. Okay, we're not getting rid of the dollar for at least another 100 years. But does it mean you shouldn't do anything? No, you should do something, right? And the more you participate in a certain type of, let's say, capitalism, that is my route, you're going to, for example, capitalism, Elon Musk route, that kind of thing of, I want to do something big. It may have a multi-generational effect for all of humanity, but really it's just my desires to do something. And I think that we need to encourage more of that notion. My desire to do something, even though it's going to take I may not see the benefit. I may not see the full thing come around. Okay, it may be 3 generations down. It may be 50 years. It may be 60 years. But you do something because it's the right thing to do. Deontological, freaking, all that good stuff, right? But anyways, I think we got a super chat. I'm kind of blind here. Let's see. Let me go over to YouTube and see what I can find. Okay. I think shout out to MOT for the $10 and the trolling. I believe the answer is clear that there is no president that has come from a third party.
Yeah, and of course the question shows that he doesn't understand the point. He doesn't understand my perspective. He understands certain things that I've said. He disagrees with certain things that I've said, and then he seems to think he understands what my full perspective is. And further evidence of this is in the chat earlier here, where he says, let's see here, Dr. Thunder wants progress but no direct political chosen side. No, that's not true. I already talked about that. Let's see here, Dr. Thunder never brings up who is voting against that black men won in the Democratic Party. That's also not true. I've done videos on this. I did a video here called "Here's Why Caucusing with the Rainbow is Problematic for Black Men." And the whole point there was because conservatives will lump black men in together with their animus against LGBTQ. So you obviously don't actually understand what my perspective is. And but it seems to be what the issue is that because you seem you think I am in what is it? I am an ally of BGS. You have an issue with BGS, so then you have some sort of pushback against me. So I don't understand it, and I also don't understand why you'd continue to hang out around the show, which at one point you were a part of the panel. But didn't understand or know how to conduct yourself on the panel in a way to have a different opinion than other folks without insulting people on their own channel even. So I don't understand what the deal is. I have not done anything to you. I have no issue with you. I had no issue with you other than you and your I don't even understand it. Why? What your channel has 33,000 subs on it or something? Mine has almost coming up on 9,000 subs. Why? I don't understand why it's of a benefit for you to troll me at all, especially when I have extended invitation to participate on the show. Not anymore. But invitation to participate on the show and to collaborate and to have meaningful conversation. But because I don't have the opinions that you have, then there's an issue. Give me a break.
So, LAR.
You're not trolling? Hold up. You're not trolling? Earlier in the chat, you said that I was too stupid to have this conversation. You're not trolling? Give me a freaking break.
LAR, regarding what I said about people not wanting to do something because they don't think that it's going to really pan out. It was something that we talked about.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to make this about me. You're patently false. You're just making stuff up. You said you never showed up when called out. That is patently false. That's disingenuous. Totally disingenuous. I told you what the issue was. And so I don't get what the deal is. Just look, I'm not into beefing, so that's not my thing. And I actually have a job. I actually have other things to do, so I don't have time for that. So anyhow, go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. So LAR, at some point we talked about political participation, okay? And that was from a group perspective. Like, hey, I believe when we were talking in Chicago and the immigrants, and there's a general, in Chicago, the black neighborhoods have the lowest voter turnout. The Asians have the highest, I believe. I don't have the stats in front of me again, but we went over those. And we talked about the general political apathy. But now I'm saying even within groups of people whom have the means, the know-how and whatnot to be able to achieve things, there might still be this idea of, well, it's not going to, they got the game sewn up over there in Davos. So what is my little conference going to do? Or, they have the STEM venture funding already kind of sewn up. So what is my little thing going to do? There's an idea of the great being the enemy of the good. I'm sure people have heard that before, where it's like, since it's not perfect, since I'm not going to be number one from jump, why do anything? And I'm saying that there are situations out there like the Federalist Society that show you that, yes, it's going to take you 50 years. You might not even be around anymore, Eliar, for some of these things to happen. And is it the case that people are just discouraged by that they don't want to put in the long fight? What do you think, Eliar? And also, sorry, your closing thoughts. So, are people discouraged from a long fight? And your final thoughts.
I think I'll put both of them together. I think people aren't necessarily discouraged, like using this particular thing with affirmative action, right? I think if you're Black, you pretty much have the thought that, oh, okay, we won't benefit from affirmative action. Whoop-de-doo. This is college admissions, right? So the thought is probably, why would I vote for anything about this now? Because I can go to HBCU. Now watch all of these other people of color start somehow just flocking to HBCUs because they're not going to get into the colleges that they want to get into because somehow they're going to understand what discrimination is, in a sense. So I think sometimes people step back from certain things. Like, this is a fight I could win without fighting. So how about I don't fight this one and I fight a different one? So to me, that's what winds up happening, you know, because at the end of the day, sometimes, you know, that's been the biggest issue, that some agendas align. Like, people say, oh, well, you're going through this, so that this, sorry for stuttering, this intersectionality in life can come to a head. So if you can cut off intersectionality, why fight that? Because it hasn't worked for you. So let you vote for your own thing specifically, and I will vote for my own thing specifically, and we'll see where we get. So I ended on that.
Very, very, very well put. Before we go to you, Dr. Thornton, your closing thoughts, I just wanted to give a kind of a brief rundown as to the facts here, okay? Because we did cover this topic from a wide variety of angles, okay? But I'll just restate the facts. And I don't think that people often clearly don't want to state the facts as to what is the timeline of this thing. So what are some facts here? There were two cases, students for fair admissions versus University of Carolina and Harvard, okay? Affirmative action was struck down 6-1. In other words, the students for fair admissions won, right? The 6 opinions were written, so there's not a shortage of opinions, right? Justice Roberts wrote the opinion, and then you have concurrent opinions by Thomas and others, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and whatnot. Ketanji Jackson wrote a dissenting opinion. Sotomayor also wrote a dissenting opinion. What is the line of precedence with regards to the Constitution and constitutional law here? We have the 14th Amendment that says equal protection under the law right out of the Civil War, right? And then 1896, you have Plessy versus Ferguson saying separate but equal. This is about equality. This is about how we achieve equality, okay? And this is how we don't infringe upon the equal rights of others, right? Brown v. Board of Education came and rectified the Plessy versus Ferguson thing. Says, right to public education must be equally made available to all. And in 1957, Justice Frankfurter gave the essential freedoms of a university, which is the freedom to decide what to teach, who can teach it, how to teach it, and who gets admitted, right? The UC system in 1978 got challenged, okay, about their quota system. They said that, look, there are many, many reasons why we do this stuff, including the fact that educational benefits flow from a diverse student body. In 2003, the court started talking about this thing, affirmative action cannot last forever. They said 25 years. They just put it out there. It's been 20 years since. And now, based on reasons that have to do with a negative impact on a different group, which is something that was stated in 2003, that this policy cannot cause a negative, cannot be used negatively against someone. And the students for fair admissions were able to successfully convince the justices that Asian Americans were negatively impacted as a group. And due to this, and due to the fact that, the thing has to come to an end, which they said 20 years ago, it's been struck down. They left certain loopholes, which I would encourage everyone to go read Justice Roberts. If you don't want to read it, you can get a AI app to read it to you, right, Dr. Thunder?
Yeah, and Snoop Dogg's voice if you want.
Exactly. You can listen to it in Snoop Dogg's voice if you want, right? Casual listening. The opinions are out there. You can see the legal reasoning. You can see the loophole that he left regarding, these essays and whatnot. But having said that, then there's the question of, okay, how do we solve these problems? Because a lot of this stuff was a red herring to begin with. Looking all the way at the top at Ivy League schools as to who got in, it's not going to solve the problems of communities that have been disadvantaged, whose cultures have been systematically destroyed over a period of time. Like, it's looking just at Ivy Leagues and stuff like that is perhaps a big distraction. And the affirmative action program did not necessarily benefit the people for whom it was designed to benefit anyways, and had to come to an end. So this is the general background there. General background with some analysis given. Okay. So Dr. Thunder, if you don't mind closing us off, and with your final thoughts and anything else you would like to mention.
Yeah. MOT, I'm not sure. You said we have a person on the panel who couldn't even make this basic point. I don't know what that means. At this point, there are 3 people on the panel. I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. But hey, I guess it doesn't really matter. But anyhow, yeah. So the affirmative action thing is interesting. We'll see if this is part of a continued part of a trend. And that trend seems to be rolling back certain pieces of legislation that are sort of have pushed the pendulum way on one side. They seem to be attempting to push that pendulum back closer to something that seems to be more balanced. I mean, you had the Roe versus Wade business. You've had, a number of other rulings, minor rulings even. I guess in LER was mentioning this business in Florida where there's been an alteration to alimony, how alimony is going to work. There are a number of states that are rolling back no-fault divorce laws. You have some states that are entertaining or that are looking at making pretty big reforms to child support, the way that child support works. You have states that are looking at 50-50 custody of children as the default. You have a number of things like this that are happening. I wouldn't be surprised if the next sort of iteration a next sort of step along this path would actually be to attempt to address the feminization of the K through 12 education system. Possibly actually changing some philosophy, changing the way that the product is delivered, maybe re-implementing stuff like shop classes and carpentry classes and trade school elements into high school in particular. And then I had mentioned earlier more schools that do just boys school and just girls school. Because here the thing is, I'm not against the empowerment of women. I like this idea in my career, in the academy, in my career as a professional musician. I certainly have been and done my part in empowering women and giving them opportunities, those that I believe were talented and capable. My issue is with female supremacy. And it seems to me that even with this affirmative action ruling, that the real issue here is an attempt at moving the pendulum back to what seems to be more balanced with respect to a lot of the issues I think that white men are actually perceiving that they have with white women. That's what I actually think that's going on. So I think all of this stuff is sort of aspects. I mean, not aspects. All of this stuff is sort of with an attempt to sort of push that pendulum back to more balanced. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how things continue to develop. I think that nobody would have thought that this, all of these, these last few rulings and a bunch of other sort of developments that have happened in the last, we'll say 5 years, 10 years, would have ever happened. But I think that this stuff is could be a sign of something that could actually be positive. And if there is actually something called Black Girl Magic, if that really is a thing, then we'll get an opportunity to see if it's real or not, or if it has been due to a disproportionate support by the government. We'll see.
All right. Another compelling episode of Case Closed. Thank you very much to the chat, to those listening and those participating in the chat. Thank you also to those whom will be listening to the replay. Shout out to the replay gang. This is an important decision that was made, and it was made very it's been highly publicized, and I like the fact that there's 6 opinions, not just on the concurring side, but on the dissenting side, and you can see all the nuances and the twists and turns that different people make. And I would generally speaking, I think that people should get in the habit of listening to Supreme Court arguments. They're not as convoluted as or crazy as people might think. There's a Constitution, which is what people are weighing against, and they have a series of precedents regarding what people have said about the Constitution, right? The justices have said about the Constitution. And then you have the case. And in this case was a simple case that said, hey, look, we think our group is being adversely affected by the admissions policies of University of Carolina and Harvard. And then it was hashed out. So regardless of where you may fall, you may agree with Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson. You may agree with Justice Thomas, who says, hey, I cannot find any educational benefit to diverse population, and this thing has done more harm than good. But the point is, understanding the facts is key, and we try to elucidate these with the highest level conversations on the most relevant topics. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, we're out. Peace.
In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what dwells behind the curtain, the face of evil smirking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons could breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising and thoughts are compromising, convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.